Hey guys, it's Fail and welcome to part number 3 of my Worbla bracer tutorial where I show you how to make one of these. In part number 0, I showed you the patterning and how I created the pattern for this piece of armor. In part number 1, I showed you how I created the Worbla base. And in part number 2, I shaped the Worbla into a bracer like this. And in part number 3, I'm going to show you how I did the decorations with the little scale details, which is probably my favorite part of this entire project. So hopefully you enjoy. Be sure to check out part number 0, 1, and 2. And if you have any questions or comments, please don't be afraid to ask. I would love to answer them for you. So enjoy! Okay guys, this is going to be part 3 of my Worbla bracer tutorial where I'm going to show you how to take the bracer that we made in part 0 or 1/2, 1 and 2 and kind of turn it into a mermaid bracer that's scaled and pretty. Ta-da! Yeah, so this took a couple, maybe a couple 5-6 hours of work total to get to this point. As you can see, I have a whole bunch to do. The first one always goes a lot slower because you have to figure out techniques and you have to figure out what's working and what's not working. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you what I did to get to this point. I have my plain Worbla bracer. I haven't sealed this at all. A lot of people will seal Worbla. We did use the smooth side of the Worbla, so there isn't much sealing that needs to be done, but I'm not going to be very worried about sealing my Worbla because I'm covering it in scales. If you weren't covering this in scales, you might want to do like a gesso or filler primer or wood glue, any of the filling techniques to smooth it out. You probably want to take a sander or sandpaper to the seams and smooth those out. As you sand, the friction will warm up the Worbla and kind of smooth those seams really well. So don't forget to use your sandpaper, Dremel, whatever you have. It'll also help you smooth Worbla. But again, since I am doing a really different finishing technique where I'm adding scales to it, you're not going to see the Worbla underneath anyways. So doesn't matter to finish it. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a base coat of paint. You can see my shin guards here. It's just kind of like a slightly pearlescent paint. I got it from Hobby Lobby. It's Createx airbrush paint. My intention was I was going to airbrush this, but then I got this idea and put scales on it and airbrush it. So I wanted the pearlized paint, but then I got the idea to put the scales on it, so it kind of became obsolete. But yeah, basically I'm choosing to use the airbrush paint because it's a thinner paint than acrylic, and because I'm going to be gluing the scales onto my bracer. I don't want acrylic paint because the acrylic paint is actually going to create a layer between the Worbla and the glue. I'm going to use E6000 to attach the sequins. But acrylic paint is like a plastic-based paint, so it's actually going to create a layer between the Worbla and the glue that's going to hold the scales on. So you're going to end up with scales that are going to be able to peel really, really easily. And this airbrush paint, since it's supposed to be airbrushed, is very, very thin. So it's going to, as you can see, this is nice and tight on there. They're not going to peel off on accident. But if it was acrylic, I think that it would. So anyways, the airbrush paint is very thin, so it's going to create a very thin layer of color. The reason why I want to put color on is because the sequins that I have, I'll kind of show you here. They're slightly translucent, transparent, like you can see through them. So if you put them against a different color, you'll see a different color through them. I think you can kind of see that they look different depending on where you put them. And I don't want them to show any color through other than the color that I want, which is blue. So I'm going to give it a blue base and glue the sequins onto that. So it's really boring. I'm just going to paint this. So I'm going to go ahead and let that dry. And then I'm going to talk about the scales. I'm going to work on adding the scales. Okay, so basically what I have here is I have a couple different colors of sequins that I got online. These are called fan-shaped sequins. They're kind of circular with a couple ridges in them. They have 2 little holes in the top for sewing them onto fabrics, which is what they're intended for, but that's not what I'm going to use them for. Yeah, and as you can see, I have a couple different colors. The main color that I'm using are these blue ones. These are slightly iridescent, and those are going to be my the main drag of the bracer, the main fin color. But I want to give a little bit of natural modeling because, you know, if you look at a fish's scales, they're not all the same color. And I kind of favor just mixing it up a little bit because the light will catch it differently and it adds a little bit of interest. Not to mention my reference, it's a little mottled and spotty, so I thought that it would work really well. So basically I picked a couple scale colors that were sequin colors that would complement the blue. And I know it's clear AB and this little purple color, and I know it doesn't look like much because it's very different, but once you hold it up against that blue paint that we put on the base, you can kind of see it turns into a blue color. So purple, blue. So that's why we put that base on the bracers in the first place. That way the lighter colored sequins that we use kind of show up as blue, but a lighter color blue. And then along these edges I have these dark colored sequins. They're like a dark blue with a really green shine. Yeah, so basically a couple tricks while I do this. I basically have scales that are kind of slightly curved. So on a fish, normally they would curve down in towards the fish, but that I have a convex. I have a curve here and I want them to match my curve, so I'm actually flipping them inside out, like upside down, so they curve out to fit in this curve that curves outwards. So a piece of the bracer that curves outwards, I'll show you here, curves outwards, I have the scale curving outwards. Otherwise you're going to be fighting with physics because they're not going to curve the same way. And I did try using a heat gun on these to kind of bend them properly, but they just kind of flatten out when they're bent, and it gets kind of annoying. Yeah, so basically what I'm going to end up doing is I'm just going to start piecing them on. I'm going to use E6000, which is just a really versatile glue that I use a lot in crafting. It's kind of rubbery, dries clear, it's really gummy. It takes a while to dry or cure, whatever it does. It takes a while to cure or dry, but that's kind of good because you can place your sequins on and then kind of like adjust them and move them around as you go. Sometimes if you have a really tight area and you need to make sure that they don't adjust or move while you're waiting for the glue to dry, I have these little tiny clothespins that I got from Hobby Lobby, and you can just kind of pin your stuff down, press them down real good. But they're only really helpful for the first set, the first couple scales that you put on there. I also use them sometimes to prop up my bracer like that, so that the edges aren't touching anything while they dry. So they're useful. They're useful in painting when you're painting. That way you can dry properly. Just something, a little tip for you guys. But yeah, so basically I'm going to be placing the sequins, and then when I finally finish all of the sequins pointing upwards, I'm going to use these. I'm going to bend them just like that, right in the middle, and I'm going to glue them down the seams. So you end up with a bracer like that. Alright, so my bracer is now dry. Again, the paint is like just a real quick swipe of some really, really light airbrush paint. I chose the airbrush paint because it's very thin and it doesn't create a layer or barrier between the Worbla and the glue that I'm going to be using to apply the sequins. The glue I'm going to use is E6000. I choose this glue because it is very gummy. It creates like an elastic bond between whatever you're gluing, as opposed to something like hot glue, which creates a plastic bond, which can be just kind of like ripped apart, and it's like a very rigid bond, so you can like rip it off and peel it off, or you know, if it gets hot you can just pull it off. And you know, something like Elmer's glue I don't think would be strong enough, and then something like what super glue just sounds dreadful to use because of how much of this stuff you're going to get on your hands. So you know, I recommend something like E6000. You could probably use hot glue if you don't want your things to be, you know, if it's just like a one-time use thing, or maybe a small piece that's not actually going to take a lot of wear and tear. But since these things are going to be bracers on my arms, wrists, legs, you know, I expect them to do a lot of bumping and stuff. And as you can see, they create a pretty good bond. I'm sure I could peel it off if I really wanted to, but obviously I don't. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my sequins ready. I'm going to be using mostly these blue ones as my base, and I'm going to kind of fill in periodically with some of the white and purple ones, with no real rhyme or reason. Just the main idea here for me is mostly blue with just a scattering of white and purple every so often. And again, the bracer has this, I guess it's a concave goes inwards, so the bracer has this concave curve on it, and I'm going to use the concave curve of the sequin. On this very bottom piece, I want my edges to be very natural, so I'm going to leave the sequin nice and uncut, but on the edges I'm going to be using a pair of scissors to trim my sequins, and I'll kind of show you that, but I'm probably going to time lapse it because it's really boring, it takes a lot of time, and you probably don't really care that much about how I glue sequins onto a bracer, but maybe it'll be fun to watch, so we'll see. So here we go. I'm going to just start with, I found it's a lot easier to apply the glue straight to the bracer than it is to try to glue the sequins, because then you end up with glue everywhere. So I'm just gonna put down like I'm gonna start one section at a time, just a little bit. E6000 kind of cures quickly, or like I guess it gums up quickly, so it becomes a little bit untacky, but it doesn't completely bond until a couple, like I think they say 24 hours, but I think that something more like 4. But yeah, so basically I'm going to, I want this one butt up against the edge, so I'm going to just trim the little edge of the sequin here and stick it on, and just rinse and repeat. So now that I have my first layer down, I went ahead and trimmed this sequin in half, whereas this one I only chopped off just a little tiny bit because I want to kind of try to overlap them a little bit, kind of like fish scales. I don't want them to line up perfectly, so I kind of want an uneven, I don't want matching numbers on each row. And then I'm going to place the sequin to kind of cover up those little holes for sewing the sequins on, since I'm not sewing anything, and the holes kind of ruin the appearance of fish scales. So I'm going to go ahead and place these to just slightly cover those holes, and that'll mark where my next row is going to go, and keep filling in. One of the reasons that I prefer the E6000 for this job is because after I start sticking all my scales on and I realize that things maybe don't look quite how I want them, I can just kind of give it a little nudge in either direction and straighten it out to how I like it. So those are the advantages to E6000. You can use whatever glue you really like, but this is the one I prefer. Make sure that you're double checking when you're looking at your sequins. Sometimes they don't turn out perfect. They're not a perfect sequin out of the sequin factory, and I don't know, it just really sucked to notice after the fact that you used a sequin that didn't have any shiny coat on it. And here we go. I'm going to add in a fancy different color one just for shits and giggles, just for fun. Yeah, and again, I tried experimenting with using a heat gun to make the scales shape better to the bracer, but all it really did was it kind of flattened the sequin out, so it wasn't really wasn't really scale shaped anymore. And another thing that it did was it promoted the peeling. These particular scales that I'm using have like this iridescent coating on them, and the iridescent coating is pretty much the reason why I wanted to use them in the first place, because it gives them this like really watery, oily fish shine to them. So they have like a little cellophane or iridescent film on top of them. Sometimes that film can peel off, but if you put heat on them, I noticed that it peels off a lot quicker. So don't do that, or you will ruin your scales that you worked so hard to apply. So try to keep heat guns away. And I guess I'm going to go ahead and time lapse this, because it's probably going to be really boring for you to watch. Alright guys, that was part number 3 of my Worbla bracelet tutorial, and the last of a 4-part tutorial on this piece of armor. So I hope you guys learned a lot. I hope you guys are inspired. If you have any questions or comments, please put them below. I will do my best to answer them. Thanks for watching. Hey guys, it's Fail, and welcome to part number 3 of my Worbla bracelet tutorial.